Welcome to You and Your Democracy. It's a short take civics lesson as part of our program, Where Do We Go From Here? I'm Chuck Parkinson. Each episode, we will look at the head and heart of democracy. We will explore the values and the principles that have created our American exceptionalism and examine the structures and institutions that give us the guardrails of our democratic republic. To quote Benjamin Franklin when asked in 1787 after the Constitutional Convention, "Doctor, what have we got, a republic or monarchy?" To which Franklin responded with a rejoinder at once witty and ominous, "A republic if you can keep it." So now let's take a look at what is this great American experiment, and then ask, what do we need to do to keep it? After touring the United States, Alex de Tocqueville wrote in 1835, "The more I observe the main effects of a free press, the more convinced I am that the modern world freedom of the press is the principal and, so to say, the constitutive element in freedom." Today, we are going to explore that premise with perspectives from a political reporter. I'm pleased to welcome my good friend Chuck Roche, former Chief Washington Correspondent for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, former National Correspondent for Gannett News Service, and published author, and more importantly, the pride of Castlewood High School. Thanks for joining us today, Chuck.
Thanks for having me, and this is a great series that you're having, Chuck.
Thanks, I appreciate it. You've been a political reporter for a long time. You've reported on many stories and issues. From a reporter's perspective, what should we know?
The profession has just totally changed, Chuck, and I don't like a lot of what's going on in my profession. There are still a number of people that I think I respect and admire, but I think it's been overrun to a degree by what I call the shout shows that a lot of people tune into as their quote unquote news on TV. And I think it's helped lead. And I think our inability to counter that with something that's, resemblance of the, sort of the aspirations for fairness and objectivity that once kind of at least overhung the profession are just not there anymore. And I think now you're in either one camp or the other, even if you're not. And it's not a good situation that our country is in right now as regard. And I'm hoping that we can get through this period of real extreme partisanship and maybe get back to a lot of those principles that Tocqueville and others talked about.
You've been a reporter for a long time in DC, and you've seen when there was, bipartisanship that existed in the political world on Capitol Hill. And as that, you take that in, and you did do the reporting from the Capitol. How did you go about that? Could you give some examples of approach?
I guess a really good example would be George McGovern and Bob Dole were as far apart as you could be, philosophically and politically, but they had a lot of areas that in particular that dealt with agriculture that they worked together on. And so I did a series of stories late in McGovern's career, and then also when Bob Dole, ran for president, about how they were able to get past their basic ideological differences to solve problems like in Food for Peace and like agricultural policy and things like that. And there's just not enough of that done anymore. There are areas of commonality in this country that I think we could focus more on. We meaning my profession, and I think, and sometimes when I ascribe to that and I talk to people about that, and sometimes I'll even post on Twitter on that, I frankly get attacked for it because it's a sellout and that sort of thing. And that's the thing I think we need to get past, that says that even if you're ideologically different, there are areas that we can get together on.
Yeah, there certainly are, and that's one of the things I think that we need to move forward in that direction. As you were reporting, one of the hardest things, and having been on the other side of the question sometimes, evasion to answering questions has been a political mainstay for many years, or obfuscating where you want to go on that. How does a reporter get an answer to the question that they ask?
Well, sometimes by not getting an answer, you get an answer. And I can give you two examples from the recent debate between the vice presidential candidates. One of whom, the Democratic candidate, was asked about this idea of sacking the court, of adding, people to the Supreme Court. In not answering that question, even after several attempts to get her to answer the question, I think people at least got some sense of saying that at least they're considering it. That very controversial decision. And on the flip side, the same thing with Mike Pence. He just really didn't answer a couple of questions. But in the context of his avoiding it, I think it gave people at least a little bit more information about how they were, the reason why they were probably trying to avoid it. And that's where the context of reporting comes in. You sort of overlay on the positions they've taken in the past. You bring that forward. You don't just fixate on the one sentence. But I do think that this whole idea of avoidance and crafting messaging has become a lot worse, from my perspective, over the last 20 or 25 years. In that congressional offices used to be separated more from the campaigns, but now you have political types from the campaigns coming into congressional offices, and they see the communications out of those congressional offices as not giving information to the body as a whole, but they see themselves more as defending the boss. And there's much more politicization of the message that's coming off Capitol Hill on particular issues. And I can just give you sort of my one very quick statistical analysis here. I believe that there are probably now 3 or 4 taxpayer paid communications people on Capitol Hill for every reporter covering Capitol Hill now. And the conflict between the two is getting a lot more to the side of the sort of the scripted message that's coming out of the politicians' offices.
That's such a really change, because you'll recall in the early days when you started in DC,
right,
that there one person handled the press in every office pretty basically. Right. It didn't matter if it was a California senator representing several million people, or a South Dakota congressman, when we had 2 districts representing a very small number of people.
Exactly. And there were 2 or 3 people at the time when I was here covering the South Dakota delegation in Washington, and now there's nobody, because the death of regional newspapers, or the demise, the falling down of regional newspapers. When I left the St. Louis Post-Dispatch 2 years ago, I was the last of more than 120 years, actually more than that, 150 years of covering Washington, and they have no correspondent covering Washington now. But Senator Hawley's press office the new senator has 4 press people, and basically all they do is script a message for him every day, and they don't answer questions, they don't respond to stuff. And I'm not picking Hawley out here in particular. It's just that's the way it is on Capitol Hill now. They don't have to respond to questions because there's none of us up there asking them anymore. And it's not good for democracy, even if you disagree with, some of the things that I might write or the press might write. There's just really nobody in there pitching for, let's just get questions answered. And, now it's all crafted and put into these little fiefdoms, and it's not good for the country.
Right. That reporting is very important for as you said, the basis of democracy is information. And if you're not getting an objective reporting of information that's out there. You touched a little bit on the different, when you mentioned about, it's almost, a lot of people don't realize the difference between, in a newspaper, between reporting and commentary. Yeah. They think it's one and the same.
Right. And part of that is my profession's fault. I think we've no fault to them, but we've brought a new generation of political reporters forth that are really, really good at the horse race and the strategy and the tactics. But when policy comes down the road, it's not a forte, and frankly, it's not what sells on a lot of these sites. There's an awful lot to explore from the ground up what's going on in the country right now. And we're just really missing all that and all of the Sturm and Drang that's happening between the candidates and the campaigns. Our country is in a tremendous change period right now because of COVID. And I always approached election coverage as an opportunity to write about what's going on in the country and the things that are driving stuff. And then you apply what the campaigns would do to certain things. I look back, for instance, I think there was a general belief that after 2016 and all the acrimony that came out of that, and And there was a general belief that there was common ground on things like a really big infrastructure bill. And I often go back and wonder what would have happened if President Trump had decided, let's go get a win, let's go get a bipartisan thing going here on infrastructure, and let's get that going. And I think all of the politics that would have come after that, even with all of the criticism of the way he's run his office and the kinds of things he says on Twitter, at least you would have had that bedrock. And nobody's gone back and explained how, A, that could have been possible, and B, why it was avoided. And I think that was an opportunity missed for the country, and nobody really writes about that or talks about that. The other thing I think that nobody is writing about or talking about is we've got a ticking time bomb going on in this country on deficit spending that's going to come back, and it's going to come back sooner rather than later, I think. And boy, nobody's talking about that in this campaign. And so, to the degree that people can criticize us for driving the issues, I think we can be criticized as a profession now for not driving the issues.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. There are a lot of other things we can talk about, but short takes are short takes.
Right,
And,
exactly.
we're about up to time. I'd like to continue this conversation if you would be willing to in further episodes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll come back anytime you want to. I applaud what you're doing, and I applaud the people that are watching.
That's great. I really appreciate it. That's
Okay.
our episode for now. I want to thank Chuck Roche for sharing his expertise and thoughts with us today. And as always, our executive producer, Suzanne Stratford, and the SDPB technical staff for their creativity and hard work on this program. Thank you also to the supporters of South Dakota Public Broadcasting who make this program possible. To view previous episodes in this series, go to sdpb.org/election. If you have comments or suggestions for future episodes, send us a note at programming@sdpb.org. Until our next short take, I'm Chuck Parkinson.